The call came at 5:42 a.m. sharp as a blade. Ashki Nez stood barefoot in the kitchen, the cold from the tile seeping up into his legs as he stared at his phone. One bar of service flickered weakly in the top corner. Unknown number. He didn't answer. Behind him, the space heater groaned its last breath for the morning. He pulled his flannel tighter and shifted his weight, listening for signs that his daughter had stirred. Nothing but silence from the small bedroom down the hall. That was good. She needed sleep. He let the call die. Outside, the snow came down fine and fast, smothering the alley behind the general store where they lived. The windows fogged with each breath. Above the humming of the fridge and the whisper of the wind came the sudden pop of the breaker tripping again. Lights out. Heat out. Just like that. Ashki dropped his head against the doorframe and closed his eyes. It was going to be one of those days. He pulled open the cabinet and reached for the instant coffee, 3 spoonfuls, into a chipped mug, then poured in the boiling water. They were almost out again. Maybe if he picked up another substitute shift at the high school, he could grab a jar. Tali had been stretching their milk as long as she could. She didn't complain. She never did. That was what made it worse. Ashki cradled the mug in both hands and stepped to the window, watching the snow bury the cracked sidewalk and the rusted mailbox that leaned sideways like it had given up. It had been 4 years since he and Ada had spoken. Not since that afternoon when he'd shown up at her house with a crying toddler and a divorce decree, and she'd looked through him like he was no longer her son. "You've made your choice, Ashki. Don't come crying back when it breaks you." She hadn't yelled. That wasn't her way. Just turned and walked inside, shut the door behind her, and let the snow fall in between them. It had broken him more than once, but he never cried back. The floor creaked behind him. Tali's small form appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt his aunt had sewn before she passed, her dark hair sticking up on one side, sleep still fogging her eyes. "No heat again?" she asked, rubbing her arm. Breaker flipped. "I'll fix it in a minute." She shuffled to the table, the one he'd rescued from the side of the road last spring, and sanded down to passable. Her legs swung just above the floor. She sniffed the air. "Is that the last of the coffee?" "Not the last. Just the last you're allowed to see." She grinned, crooked and sly. "Liar." He poured her a cup of hot water and dropped in a cinnamon stick from the stash Nora had brought them 2 weeks ago. "Warm your hands," he said. "I'll make oatmeal in a sec." He watched her as she leaned over the steam, her small fingers wrapped around the mug. 11 going on 40. She had her mother's calm, but her eyes were pure fire when she wanted something. That was him in there, buried deep but steady. He thought about the unknown call again, about the pit forming in his gut. He turned on the old radio to break the silence. Static, then a local DJ talking about the storm rolling in from Farmington. Schools might shut down, roads could close. And here he was, still no space heater that worked properly, still waiting for the district to confirm a substitute slot that barely paid enough to cover gas. He moved to the breaker box in the hallway and flipped the switch. A thud echoed through the wall, and the lights buzzed back to life. The heater clicked on. The hum was uneven but steady enough. Tali clapped once. "Heroic," she said. "I do what I can." He was spooning oats into boiling water when the knock came. 3 slow raps on the door. Not the hurried kind of a neighbor asking for help. Not someone selling anything either. Tali looked up. He felt it too, the strange stillness in that sound. He set the pot aside and walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. A tall man stood outside, wrapped in a thick wool coat, his boots already coated in snow. He looked like he didn't belong in town, like he came from further out. His face was creased but calm, like a man who'd long since learned how to wait in silence. "Ashki Nez," the man asked. "Who's asking Ruben Sosi?" "I'm the attorney for Honagha Yazi." Ashki blinked. That name came from a place in his childhood, distant and faded like an old song he didn't know he remembered. "She passed 2 weeks ago," Ruben said. "Her estate named you the primary beneficiary." Silence fell like snowfall between them. He felt Tali edge closer behind him. "Me, yes. She left you her land and her house." Echo Ridge. Ashki stared, not fully hearing it. His aunt Honagha, the one who used to give him sweet bread and let him wander the hills barefoot. She'd disappeared from his life long before Ada turned cold. And now her house. "There must be some mistake," Ashki said. "No mistake. I have the papers with me." Ruben pulled a thick envelope from his coat. She was very specific. "The property is in Kinwani Crossing. She wanted you to come see it yourself. She said you'd understand once you stepped inside." Ashki didn't reach for the envelope. Behind him, Tali whispered, "Is that a good thing?" He didn't know. But something shifted in the air, like a door cracking open in the back of his mind. Like a voice long forgotten saying, "Come home." Ashki took the envelope. Heavy, real. "You said it's still there," he asked, "waiting for you." He didn't speak again until the man was gone. He closed the door softly, as if afraid to disturb the thought forming inside him. Tali pulled at his sleeve. "Dad." He turned to her. She looked up at him with those eyes that always saw too much. "Do we have a house now?" she asked. He crouched down beside her. "We might. Do we get to go see it?" Ashki opened the envelope just enough to see a set of keys and a letter in Honagha's handwriting. "I think we have to. This place remembers things even if you don't." Ruben Sosi. The road narrowed, with every mile winding through frozen hills and sun-bleached brush. Snow flurried sideways in gusts swept off the mesas like whispers from the past. Ashki gripped the wheel of his old pickup, every joint in the steering column rattling, as the truck climbed a rise outside Kinwani Crossing. The heater wheezed, but couldn't keep up. In the passenger seat, Tali leaned against the window, her breath fogging the glass, as she traced spirals with her finger. "How much longer?" she asked, not for the first time. "Not far," Ashki said, though he wasn't sure. The directions Ruben had given him felt like something between a legal document and a legend, past the red rock split turn left at the post with the broken feather carved in. No GPS, no cell service. Just memory and landmarks. Tali sat back and pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "It's quiet out here." "Too quiet?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's the kind that makes your chest feel big." Ashki knew what she meant. There was something about this land ancient watching. He hadn't been out here since he was a boy, maybe 5, 6 years old. But something about the long stretch of dusty fence lines and the scent of juniper in the air stirred things loose in his mind. Shadows of stories, soft voices, the feel of someone's hand guiding him through the brush. They came around a bend, and the house appeared without warning. It sat in a wide basin tucked between 2 rises, its adobe walls the color of dry clay. Snow dusted the low rooftop. A wide porch wrapped around the front wooden beams, weathered silver with age. The windows were shuttered, but clean. Everything about the place was still like it was holding its breath. Ashki eased the truck to a stop just beyond the fence line. There was already a vehicle parked out front, a black SUV with tribal plates. Reuben. Tali sat up straight, her eyes wide. That's it. That's it. She stared a moment longer. Looks like it's waiting. Ashki stepped out into the wind and helped her down. The snow was ankle-deep, but soft, not yet frozen solid. He looked around. No signs of neglect. The fencing was intact. A light dusting of footprints led to the porch. Reuben met them at the top of the steps, dressed in a long wool coat and sturdy boots. His gray braid was tucked neatly beneath his collar. He looked like someone carved from the same stone as the cliffs that watched over them. "Glad you made it," he said, holding out a gloved hand. "You found the feather post." "Eventually." Ashki replied, shaking his hand. "Thought I'd taken a wrong turn 3 times. You're here. That's what matters." Tali stepped up beside her father. Reuben's face softened. "And this must be Miss Tali." She nodded politely. "Yes, sir." Reuben smiled. "Your great-aunt Honagha would have liked you. She always said this house needed young footsteps again." Ashki looked at the porch at the warped door with its iron handle and deep-set wood grain. "It doesn't look empty." "It wasn't," Reuben said. "Honagha stayed here until the very end. She made arrangements before she passed, hired a caretaker, prepaid utilities, even the groceries. Said she wanted it ready for you." "Why me?" Ashki asked, his voice quiet. Reuben didn't answer right away. He opened the door. "You should see for yourself." Inside, the air was cold but clean. Not musty, not stale, just still. Furniture stood in place beneath draped sheets. A woven rug stretched across the main room, red and black geometric patterns that spoke of old hands and long hours. The hearth held neatly stacked firewood. Everything had been left with care. Tali walked in, eyes wide, turning in slow circles. "It's so big." The ceilings were high, the walls thick. Narrow hallways branched off in 3 directions. The house was silent, but not empty. It felt aware. Reuben stood beside a built-in shelf lined with framed photographs. "Honagha left you everything. The house, the land, the contents. There's also a small fund set aside for maintenance taxes, repairs, essentials. She didn't want it to become a burden." Ashki looked at the photographs, some black and white. Others faded color. One showed a young girl, maybe 10, with long braids and sharp, smiling eyes. Another was a woman in her 20s, standing in front of this very house, the mountains behind her. His chest tightened. That was Ada. Younger, softer. "She lived here," Ashki said, barely above a whisper. "For a time," Reuben said. "Before the fire. Before everything changed." "What fire?" Reuben shook his head. "That's a longer story. One you'll have to piece together." Ashki turned to him. "She never spoke of this place. Not once." "There's a reason," Reuben said. "This house holds things she couldn't face." Ashki felt Tali's hand slip into his. She looked up at him with that quiet steadiness she carried, as if waiting for him to decide what came next. "Can we look around?" she asked. "Yes," Reuben said. "But one thing first." He walked to a cabinet near the fireplace and pulled out a heavy iron key. He held it between his fingers like it weighed more than metal should. "There's a room on the 2nd floor. The north room. It's locked. Why Honagha instructed that it not be opened until you're ready. The key is here. Whether or not you use it, your choice." Ashki took the key. It was cold in his hand. "What's in there?" Reuben met his gaze. "Family. Truth. Maybe things you've forgotten." or things you were never told? Ashki nodded once. Reuben left soon after with a promise to return in a few days to go over legal papers. By the time his SUV vanished beyond the hills, Ashki had stoked the fire and lit 3 of the old oil lamps. The house flickered with warmth, shadows dancing softly across the walls. He watched Tali wander from room to room, her steps echoing faintly. She stopped at a narrow hallway, pointing. "Is this the way to the locked room?" He followed her gaze, heart thudding. "Yes." Tali tilted her head. "It feels like that part of the house is listening." Ashki didn't answer. He slipped the key into his pocket and looked around at the home he hadn't known he'd lost. The wind picked up outside, brushing snow against the windows. The fire snapped in the hearth. Somewhere beneath their feet, the floor creaked, as if the house had just taken a breath. Some doors don't stay shut just because you lock them. Honagha Yazi letter. The north hallway ran cold, colder than the rest of the house. Ashki noticed it the second night. He'd been walking the floors after Tali fell asleep, the quiet pressing in from all sides, like a memory too big to hold. The wind outside had died, but in the hallway something moved with its own breath, not threatening, just expectant, waiting. He stopped halfway down the corridor, the key in his pocket, heavy like a stone. At the end of the hall, the north room's door sat flush with the wall, plain and undecorated. No sign, no symbol. Just old wood and the smallest brass keyhole dulled with age. Ashki stepped closer, his bare feet silent on the worn floorboards. He placed a hand on the door. It was cool. Still. Not yet, he told himself. He turned and walked back the way he came. The morning brought sun, but no warmth. The snow outside had iced over in the night, crusting the earth with silence. In the kitchen, Tali sat at the old table eating toast from bread they'd brought in a cooler. She had lined up 6 rocks on the windowsill, small ones she'd collected on the short walk to the truck the day before. "Each one has a name," she said, noticing his look. "This one's Nali. This one's Dibe. That one with the stripe is Ina." Ashki nodded, pouring hot water over the last of the herbal tea Reuben had left behind. "What about the others? I'm waiting to learn their names." He smiled softly. "They'll tell you if I listen right." He sat across from her, the light catching on the side of her cheekbone. "You want to explore today?" She brightened. "Can we start upstairs?" They spent the morning moving from room to room, pulling dust cloths off furniture like lifting veils. A sitting room with low shelves packed with books. A hallway filled with framed beadwork and faded newspaper clippings. A corner nook where a loom still sat mid-project as though someone had left only minutes ago. Honagha's presence lingered in the textures in the carefully folded blankets and the smell of cedar that clung to the air. Tali opened a narrow door and peered inside. "Bathroom," she said, disappointed. "Not every room's a treasure," Ashki replied, lifting the lid on an old cedar chest filled with linens that smelled like earth and lavender. They found the staircase behind a thick blue curtain in the main hallway, narrow, steep, and crooked, as if the house had settled differently over the years. At the top, a short hall split in 2 directions. The west side held 3 small bedrooms, each simple and clean. Tali chose the one with a view of the hills and the sunlight catching the far wall. "I want this one," she declared, spinning once in the middle. "It's yours." The east hallway led to a large room at the end, clearly Honagha's. The bed was still made. A journal lay on the side table. A turquoise shawl hung on the back of the chair by the window. Ashki stood just inside the door, not yet ready to go further. Tali pointed to a photograph on the dresser. 2 girls stood arm in arm, both beaming. One had long dark braids and a tilt to her smile that was unmistakably Ada. The other must have been Honagha younger, before the silver hair and bent shoulders of the woman he vaguely remembered. Was that really Grandma, Tali asked? He nodded slowly. She looks different. She was different. They turned to leave when Tali paused at another door, the last in the hallway. Plain, quiet, closed. Is that the locked one? Ashki joined her. The door had no markings, no warmth. It is. Are we going to open it? Not today, she nodded once. It doesn't feel mad, she said. Just lonely. That afternoon, Ashki searched the downstairs cabinets for plates and found something else, an old tin box tucked high above the pantry shelves. It was square, rusted at the corners, decorated with a faded image of blue corn. Inside were recipe cards, hundreds of them. Each one was written in the same tidy, looping hand Honagha's. Many included dates and notations in the margins. He read through 5 or 6 at random sheep stew, with notes about a family gathering in 1982. Fry bread for a neighbor's naming ceremony. Blue corn pancakes for a summer morning with VV. He paused. He flipped another card. Corn mush made this for V when she was sick. She laughed at my tea, said I loved her too much. Another. Juniper lamb. Jonas brought the meat. V brought the silence. She's already thinking about leaving. I wish she wouldn't. He set the box down, heart pounding. Dad. Tali's voice came from the doorway. You okay? He turned. She looked concerned, watching him the way she always did when she sensed something shifting. He held up the card. This is about your grandmother. And someone named Jonas. Is Jonas our family? I don't know yet. Tali stepped closer. She looked at the box, at the writing, at the emotion etched between the words. Feels like a story, she said. It does. They spent an hour reading together. Each recipe unfolded like a page from a hidden life. Some were joyful, fresh tortillas for the first snow-roasted squash for a birthday. Others were darker. Stew for the night. She came back bloodied and didn't explain. Bread she didn't eat. She cried instead. The notes painted a picture of love, fear, and distance, of something breaking between two sisters. Ashki found a card pressed to the very bottom, old and curling at the edges. Coffee cake baked this the day after the fire. V didn't come. I left it on the porch and watched it freeze. The fire. His mind jumped back to Reuben's words. Something happened here. Something that split their family. He looked at Tali. Her eyes were on him, but her hand was gently tracing the margin of one card, the one where Honagha had written simply. She didn't forgive me. I never stopped loving her anyway. Ashki closed the box. There's more in this house than just rooms, he said. Tali nodded. I think it wants to be remembered. That night after Tali had gone to sleep, and the wind had picked up again, Ashki stood in the hallway outside the north room. He placed the key in the lock and left it there. Just for a moment. Then, without turning it, he pulled his hand away. Not tonight. But soon. Before she became Adanez, she was someone else. Someone who laughed. Nora Begay, the first person they met in Kinwani Crossing, was a woman with a long gray braid, deep smile lines, and a voice that rolled like morning wind through the canyons. Nora Begay stood behind a folding table at the community center, handing out fresh fry bread wrapped in paper towels and telling stories between each transaction. Tali had spotted the sign from the truck window. Free community lunch. Stories welcome. She begged her dad to stop. Ashki hadn't planned on lingering in town, but something about the open doors and the scent of warm food in cold air made it hard to drive past. They walked in to find the small hall filled with the scent of stewed mutton, cedar smoke, and something sweet. Families gathered at long tables. Kids ran between legs. On the far wall, a hand-painted mural showed the red cliffs of home sheep in the distance, a grandmother under a tree. Two new faces, Nora had said, squinting at them over her glasses. You with the Nez family. Ashki nodded slowly. Honagha was my great-aunt. Nora's whole face changed. She smiled with something deeper than politeness. Well then, she said, you're exactly who I was hoping would show up. She handed him 2 plates piled high and waved them to sit. 10 minutes later, she was at their table with a cup of coffee and questions that were somehow gentle and unrelenting at the same time. So you're Ada's son, she said, as if confirming something for herself. Ashki braced. Yes, ma'am. She used to laugh with her whole body, Nora said, not unkindly. Used to wear sun-yellow shawls and hum while she cooked. Then she left this place and forgot who she was. Tali watched her with curious eyes, chewing slowly. You knew her, Nora smiled. We grew up across the field from each other. We used to race to the spring before school. She always won, said it was her long legs. I think she just liked being first. Ashki's chest tightened. He couldn't imagine Ada racing barefoot in the morning light. Couldn't imagine her laughing. What happened? He asked. Nora leaned back, cradling her mug. Hard things, old secrets, and one terrible night. She glanced at Tali, then back at him, eyebrows raised. It's okay, Ashki said. She knows more than most adults. Nora nodded. It was the summer of '75. Your mother was seeing Jonas Begay, my cousin. Sweetheart since school. They were going to marry. She was happy then. Real happy. But your grandfather, he didn't like it. Ashki felt something sink. Why, Jonas was quiet, kind, hard-working. But he wasn't what your grandfather wanted. He had no land of his own yet. No name that held weight in your grandfather's eyes. Ada didn't care. She was bold back then. Said love was enough. She sighed. They were supposed to run off one night. Honagha helped them pack. She told me she left food on the porch thinking they'd pass by and grab it. But they never made it out. Ashki's voice was barely audible. Why not? Nora looked down into her coffee. The barn caught fire. Jonas was inside. They found him in the loft, said he was trying to save his horse. But some folks whispered he'd been trapped. Tali's spoon stilled in her hand. No one proved anything, Nora continued. But your mother changed after that. She left within the week. Didn't even take her clothes. Ashki felt the room tighten around him. His mother had never spoken of a love before his father. Never mentioned Jonas. Never hinted at a fire at a plan to leave. And Honagha, he asked. She never left the house again except to walk the land. Said she couldn't step into town without feeling Ada's silence. Ashki swallowed hard. Did they speak again? Not once. Silence settled between them, not awkward, just deep. Then Tali reached into her bag and pulled out the tin recipe box they'd brought to town. We found this in the pantry. Some of the cards have notes. They talk about Jonas and V. Nora's eyes widened as she gently took the box. She opened it, flipping through slowly. When she reached the card labeled Juniper Lamb, her breath caught. This one, she said. This was his favorite. She ran her fingers across the faded ink. V was Ada. Veronica back then. That was the name she dropped when she left. Said Ada was simpler, harder. She thought it made her strong. She handed the box back to Tali, who held it like something sacred. These cards, these are pieces of her heart. Honagha never stopped loving your mother even when she was angry. She put her love into food, into these little notes. She was trying to leave a trail back. Ashki nodded slowly. And now Nora looked at him. Now you're holding it. After lunch, Nora walked them out to the truck. She left something else, she said, reaching into her pocket. Gave it to me in case you ever showed. It was a folded envelope. Inside was a note written in that same careful hand. Ashki. If you've come back, you're ready. There's more I couldn't put into words while I was alive. The North Room holds what I couldn't say out loud. Forgive what we became. Love, Honagha. He read it twice before folding it back and sliding it into his coat. Tali stood watching the snow swirl across the parking lot. Are you ready? She asked. He looked at her. Not yet. She nodded like she understood. But soon. They drove back in silence, the hills rising again to meet them, the sky wide and cold and clear. Echo Ridge appeared just as they left, its still watchful, familiar now. Ashki parked the truck and turned off the engine. The silence afterward was immediate. He reached into the glove box and pulled out the envelope again. He held it in his lap a long time. Tali didn't ask anything. She just waited. Inside the house, the fire had burned low. He added fresh wood, stoked it gently, and watched it take. The recipe box sat on the table. Next to it, the iron key. Ashki picked up the key and walked to the base of the stairs. He stood there for a long time, his breath catching in his throat, memories he didn't own pressing against him like wind through cracks. He closed his hand around the key and started to climb. Some things burn deeper than flames. Reuben Sosi. The key turned with a quiet click, the kind of sound that echoed too loudly in a silent house. Ashki held his breath as he pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. Cold air rushed out sharp and dry, carrying the faint scent of sage dust and old paper. He stepped inside slowly, as if afraid to wake something. The room was large, larger than he'd expected. The windows were shuttered but not sealed, letting in slivers of morning light that cut across the floor like memory. A small table sat in the center with two chairs, both facing an empty fireplace. Along the far wall stood a cedar chest and a tall bookshelf stuffed with binders, journals, and loose papers. Everything was neat, untouched, preserved. Tali stood behind him, wrapped in her quilt, quiet and alert. Is this her room? She asked. Ashki shook his head. I don't think so. I think this was for everything she didn't know what to do with. He crossed to the bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Inside, Honagha's handwriting filled the pages, tidy, deliberate, deeply personal. He sat in the nearest chair and began to read. August 1975. She came home with blood on her knuckles and her mouth set like stone. Jonas was still at the barn waiting. I asked what happened. She wouldn't answer. Just said, if he doesn't leave tonight, something bad's going to happen. I told her I'd go with them. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her. Ashki turned the page. August 9th. I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I saw the glow through the window. The barn was burning. I ran barefoot. Jonas's horse was already out. I thought he'd gotten clear, but I heard shouting from the loft. By the time I got close, the roof collapsed. Ashki closed the book. His hands were shaking. Tali sat across from him, her eyes wide. He died in the fire. Yes. His voice was barely more than breath. She leaned forward. Do you think someone did it on purpose? I don't know. He stood and opened the cedar chest. Inside were more journals, photographs, letters. He dug through them until he found one marked with a ribbon. A manila folder sat beneath it, brittle with age. Inside were clippings, an obituary for Jonas Begay. No mention of foul play. A short paragraph survived by his sister, 2 nephews and a fiancée, Veronica Nez. Died from injuries sustained in an accidental barn fire. Accidental. Except it didn't feel accidental anymore. At the bottom of the folder, folded tightly, was a typewritten statement. He unfolded it carefully. Statement by Honagha Yazi, August 12, 1975. Ashki read slowly, each line tightening his chest. She described seeing her father, his grandfather, at the edge of the field that night. Said he'd been furious about Ada's defiance. Said he warned them both. She admitted she hadn't seen him near the barn, but claimed he knew too much, too soon. That he'd watched it burn without calling for help. That his face had been calm. She never submitted the statement. It was marked, not filed. He turned the page over. Written in her own hand, I didn't want to tear this family apart. But I couldn't pretend anymore. If someone comes looking for the truth, let them find it here. Tali touched the edge of the folder. Do you think he set the fire? Ashki didn't answer. His jaw clenched. He looked at the photo tucked in the journal beside the folder. It was a snapshot, his grandfather, tall and unsmiling, standing beside a younger Ada, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. In the corner stood a man he didn't recognize, maybe Jonas. The edges were scorched, like someone had tried to burn the past, but couldn't go through with it. He placed everything back carefully and closed the chest. We need to talk to Reuben. They found him at the chapter house later that day, helping organize supplies for the snowstorm forecasted for the weekend. When Ashki walked in holding the journal, Reuben set down his clipboard and motioned him to the back office. I opened the room, Ashki said, without sitting. Reuben nodded, waiting. There's a statement in there. She believed my grandfather set the fire, that he meant to kill Jonas, that he watched him die. Reuben exhaled slowly. She told me once. Not everything, but enough. She wanted to file it. I helped her draft the affidavit, but she backed out the day we were supposed to take it to the council. Why? She said it would destroy your mother, that it would stain every memory. And she believed in justice, but she also believed in timing. She hoped Ada would come back and face it herself. That never happened. Ashki sat down hard in the chair across from him. Why didn't anyone tell me? Reuben gave him a long look. Because the past in our families, it sticks, like ash. You think it's settled, but then a wind stirs, and it's everywhere again. Honagha wanted to protect you, until you were ready. I'm not sure I am. Reuben folded his hands. I know, but you're asking the questions. That means you're closer than you think. Ashki pulled something else from his coat pocket, a photocopy of the marriage license he'd found in the chest. It had Ada's name, Jonas's name, the date August 10th, 1975. She married him, Ashki said, the day before he died. Reuben nodded. In the hospital after they pulled him from the wreckage, he was still conscious. Barely. A minister came. It was private. No family. Just them. Ashki's breath left him in a rush. That means... Yes, Reuben said gently. You are his son, his only son. The words hit him like a drumbeat in his chest. Not speculation, not rumor, truth. Jonas Begay had been his father, the man who died in the fire, the man whose death fractured everything, and his mother never told him. He sat in silence for a long time until Tali knocked softly and poked her head in. Dad, she said, do we still have time to stop by the trading post? I wanted to get something for the fireplace. He stood his legs unsteady. Yeah, he said, voice rough. Yeah, we've got time. As they walked out into the cold, his daughter slipped her hand into his, just like she always did. He looked down at her, his child, the piece of him that held every reason to break the silence, to stop the cycle, to finally speak what no one else had dared. He wasn't born of scandal or shame. He was born of love they couldn't protect. And now it was up to him to protect what was left. You don't bury the past by forgetting it. You bury it by naming it. Nora Begay. The wind started before dawn, low and restless, slipping through the window cracks with a whistle like breath drawn sharp between teeth. Snow came in steady sideways sheets. By the time Ashki stepped outside to check the truck, the world was white and near invisible. He couldn't see the fence line. Roads will be closed by noon, Nora said when he called her. You and Tali better hunker down. That old house was built for storms like this. They had firewood water, a stocked pantry, enough to wait it out. But something inside Ashki stirred with a pressure that had nothing to do with the weather. He lit the fire and sat in Honagha's old armchair, the one near the hearth, with the quilt Tali had brought down over his legs. She was upstairs reading through the recipe box again. She'd taken to writing her own cards, little things they'd made together. Juniper tea, dry bread with honey-thick cornmeal mush with blue corn and raisins. Ashki looked at the envelope again, his mother's handwriting on the front. He hadn't opened it yet. Hadn't dared. It had been tucked inside one of Honagha's journals, sealed yellowed slightly at the edges. Ashki, if this ever finds you. He stood and crossed the room, kneeling by the fire. The flames danced low and steady, warming the room in slow pulses. He took a breath, broke the seal, and opened the letter. I don't know what you've learned. I don't know what you've found. But if you've come this far, you know more now than I ever told you. I was afraid. That's the only explanation I can offer. I was young, and after Jonas died, I wasn't strong. I thought if I left it all behind, Honagha, this land, even my name, I could survive it. But I didn't. I just froze the pain and carried it with me. Your father loved you. He held your name in his mouth the day before he passed. We named you together. Ashki, my boy. You are not a shadow. You are not a mistake. You are the proof we lived. That we dared. I'm sorry I never told you. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just ask that you don't carry this silence the way I did. Ada. His eyes blurred. He read it again. Then again. The paper trembled in his hands. You are not a mistake. He closed his eyes. Heard her voice softer than he remembered it in years. Not the clipped, distant tone she'd used during their last conversations, but the voice from long before when he was sick, or scared, or just needed her to sit beside him in the dark. He folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it on the mantel. Behind him, footsteps padded down the stairs. Tali stood there holding her small notebook. She didn't speak, but she watched him closely. I read her letter, he said. Tali walked over and sat beside him on the floor. She leaned against his shoulder, quiet and warm. "She loved you," she said after a moment. "I think she did," Ishki said, "but she didn't know how to show it after everything broke." Tali nodded. "That happens. Sometimes people don't know what to do with their pain." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're too wise for 11. I read a lot." They stayed there listening to the wind, the crackle of the fire, the slow heartbeat of the house. When the knock came, it was nearly lost in the storm. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps on the front door. Ashki stood. Tali rose with him silent. He opened the door to find Reuben Sosi on the porch, coat white with snow, face serious. "I didn't expect visitors today," Ashki said. "I wouldn't have come, but there's something you need to see." He stepped inside, stamping the snow from his boots. In his hands was a folder. Not old like the others knew. Clean. Stamped with the seal of the tribal court. Ashki motioned to the table. Reuben laid it down and opened it. "This came in yesterday. Your grandfather's estate has been reviewed as part of the land reassessment project. In the process, some records surfaced: letters, sealed documents, witness accounts. It's unofficial, but we now have strong testimony that he paid a man to set that fire. The man confessed before passing 2 weeks ago in Albuquerque." Ashki's stomach dropped. "So it's real. It wasn't just suspicion." "No, it's real. He knew Jonas would be in the barn. He timed it. But he made it look like an accident." Tali sat on the edge of the couch, still listening. Reuben continued, his voice low. "There are implications. Legal, yes, but also for the community. People here remember Jonas. They remember your mother. This won't stay quiet once it's filed." Ashki rubbed his hands over his face. "Why now?" "Because the truth has a way of surfacing when someone's finally ready to hold it." Reuben reached into the folder again and pulled out a photograph. It was a copy Ada and Jonas standing together under a cottonwood, his hand resting lightly on her waist. She was smiling. He was too. "You have to decide what to do with this," Reuben said, sliding it across the table. Ashki stared at the photo. He didn't move. "I'll leave you to it," Reuben said, gathering his things. Ashki walked him to the door. "There's something else," Reuben said before leaving. "Nora's organizing a winter gathering. Honagha used to host it. Storytelling, food, music. It was her way of keeping the community tethered. People are asking if you'll come, if you'll bring her house back into it." Ashki didn't answer right away. "I'll think about it." Reuben nodded. "That's enough for now." The door closed. The storm howled louder. Ashki walked back to the fire. Tali sat with the photo in her lap. "They look happy," she said. They were. She looked up at him. "We should go to the gathering." He sat down beside her. "You think so?" She nodded. "We've been listening to all these stories. Maybe it's time we tell one." Ashki looked around at the home. The walls that had held so much. The room that had waited for decades to be opened. The fire still burning. He reached out and touched the photograph, his hand beside hers. "Then we'll go." She was never just a shadow in the corner. She was the one who lit the lamp. Nora Begay. The snow had settled by morning. Not melted, just paused, the storm having passed through in a hush of white silence. Every branch on the trees sagged under the weight of it. The hills looked like they were holding their breath. Echo Ridge stood clean and still, draped in memory. Ashki and Tali worked together to shovel a path from the house to the truck, their breath fogging in the cold. Tali had wrapped a red scarf around her head, one of Honaga's, and tied it in the same way she'd seen in old photographs. She moved with quiet purpose, like she belonged here now. "Do you think she would have gone?" she asked, tossing a scoop of snow to the side. Honagha. Ashki looked up. To the gathering, Tali nodded. He leaned on his shovel. She never missed it. Not until she stopped leaving the house. "Then we're going." The drive into town took longer than usual. The plows had cleared the main road, but ice lingered in the shade of the trees. They passed 3 cars in ditches and 2 kids hauling a sled down the shoulder. Ashki kept both hands on the wheel, jaw-tight eyes scanning the curves, like they might move if he looked away. The community center sat warm and lit on the edge of town, glowing like a hearth. Parking was scarce. Ashki pulled the truck into a packed snowbank and killed the engine. Inside, music drifted faint through the walls, soft flute laughter, the hum of voices layered and low. They stepped inside and were hit with a wave of warmth and scent: sage smoke, mutton stew, fry bread. The lights were low-strung from the rafters in looping arcs. People turned as they entered, pausing, then smiling. "Ada's boy," someone whispered. "The Nez kid." They came. Ashki kept his shoulders steady. Tali slipped her hand into his. Nora found them by the tea table. She wore a deep blue skirt and a silver pin at her collar, shaped like a rising sun. "I'm glad you came," she said, pressing a warm hand to Ashki's shoulder. "This place remembers your family. You're part of this." He nodded. "I wasn't sure. You never are until you show up." They sat near the front where the elders told stories. Tali perched on the edge of her chair, listening with her whole body. A man recounted the legend of the coyote and the stars, his voice rising and falling like wind through pine. Another shared a memory of his first hunt with his grandfather, how they'd eaten in silence, firelight, catching on the bone knife. Then Nora stood. "I want to speak of someone we lost not long ago," she said, turning slightly to face the crowd. "Honagha Yazi." Murmurs rippled. "She was the keeper of stories," Nora said. "The one who remembered the names of your grandmothers and your grandfathers even when you didn't. She made stew that healed, bread that forgave, tea that told the truth. She wasn't perfect. She was strong. She loved hard and held her silence like a stone until it cracked." Ashki felt the breath catch in his chest. She also raised a house that remembered Nora, continued, her eyes catching his. And now that house has opened its doors again. To her blood. To her legacy. She stepped aside, looking directly at Ashki. "You have her voice now, if you want to use it." The room went quiet. Ashki stood slowly. The floorboards creaked under his boots. He walked to the front, past the elders, past the fire circle, and turned to face the room. Tali watched him, hands clasped in her lap. "My name is Ashki Nez," he said. "My mother was Ada. My great-aunt was Honagha. I didn't know much about either of them until recently." He paused, letting the silence settle. "This town, this land, remembers more than I ever did. I grew up thinking my family was small, quiet, cold sometimes. I didn't know there was love behind all that silence." A few heads nodded. "I found her letters, her journals, the locked room. I found the truth about my father, about Jonas Begay. Some of you knew him. Some of you knew what happened. I didn't. Not until now." He looked at Nora. She gave the smallest nod. "My grandfather Ashki said the word dry and his mouth burned down a barn. He killed a good man. And we carried that silence for decades. My mother buried it. Honagha held it, and I was raised in the shadow of it. He looked around the room. I'm done being quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. Then someone clapped. Slow, deliberate. Then another joined, and another, until the whole room was echoing with it, not applause for show, but something older, deeper. Approval, recognition. Tali stood and walked to her father, wrapping both arms around his waist. Nora came forward, handed him a smooth stone. For the circle, she said. Ashki placed it among the others near the hearth. The firelight danced across it. One more truth added to the warmth. Later, after the food, after the dancing, after the quiet stories shared in corners and old names whispered back into the room, Ashki and Tali stood outside in the freezing dark. The stars were sharp and cold above them. You did good, Tali said. I was terrified, but you still did it. They drove home in silence, the truck rattling steady over the snow-packed roads. The house glowed in the distance, a single light left burning in the front window. When they stepped inside, the warmth met them like a welcome back. The fire had dimmed, but still lived. Ashki pulled the photo of Ada and Jonas from the mantel, holding it in both hands. He looked at the way their eyes met, the easy joy between them. He set it beside Honagha's shawl on the table. Then he added the stone Nora had given him. Tali came up behind him. Can I light the lamp? He handed her the match. She struck it and lit the old brass lamp on the mantel. Its glow spread out soft and golden across the room. They stood there a while saying nothing, just remembering. You can't take back silence, but you can speak forward. Ashki Nez. The storm had left behind a calm so deep it felt unnatural. Echo Ridge wore the stillness like a new skin, soft and soundless. For the first time since they'd arrived. Ashki woke without the weight of dreams, without the ache of questions pressing into his ribs. The house was quiet, but not heavy. There was something like peace beginning to settle in the corners. He found Tali curled on the rug near the hearth, surrounded by books and scraps of paper. Her face still held sleep, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other wrapped around a pencil. Ashki leaned down and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. You sleep here all night. She stirred, blinked at him and nodded. Didn't want to leave the stories. He looked around at the spread notes about family recipes, names drawn in careful block letters, a rough tree of the Nez and Yazzie bloodlines. In the center, a short essay titled, The Fire Nobody Named. Tali sat up and rubbed her eyes. I want to read this at school. When we go back. Ashki sat beside her. You sure? She nodded. Kids always ask where I'm from. What kind of name is Tali? Why I wear moccasins sometimes. I want to tell them the real story. Not just say New Mexico and leave it there. He smiled and pulled her close. Then tell it. Later that morning, they drove into town to visit Reuben. The chapter house was quiet, half staff still gone due to the weather. Reuben met them at the back entrance with a thermos of coffee and a thick file tucked under his arm. I found more, he said. Letters from Jonas. He'd been writing to Ada all that last summer. Ashki took the file and opened it slowly. Inside were carbon copies saved from a cousin's filing cabinet. Some were torn at the edges, some yellowed. All still legible. June 3rd, 1975. I saw your father in the field today. He didn't speak, just stood there watching the barn. I don't trust the way he's been moving lately. If we're going to leave, it has to be soon. I can't keep waiting. I love you, but I'm scared. Not for myself, for you. July 12, 1975. I fixed the trailer. Got the axle replaced. It'll hold the horses and the bags. If we can get past the state line, your cousin in Chinle said we can stay until we figure it out. We just need one night. August 8, 1975. You didn't show. I waited until the moon passed over the ridge. Then I walked home alone. Tell me you're safe. Tell me you're still mine. The final letter was dated the day before the fire. Ashki closed the folder. They loved each other, he said more to himself than to Reuben. They did, Reuben said, and that love got buried under fear and power, under things no one wanted to say out loud. Ashki looked up. Not anymore. Reuben studied him for a moment, then nodded. What do you want to do with the letters? I want to give them back. To her. Even if it's too late. Tali tilted her head. Give them where? To her grave. Reuben's expression shifted gently. She's not buried here. After she passed, the family had her laid to rest in Gallup. But there is a marker here. Behind the church. A small one. Honagha used to visit it every month. That afternoon they stood in the old churchyard, wine cold against their cheeks. The sky above was open, deep blue clouds stretched thin. The marker was simple. Just Ada's name, her birth date. No mention of death. She wasn't claimed when she passed. Reuben explained softly. No family stepped forward. So the hospital sent her north. Honagha fought to have something placed here anyway. Ashki knelt beside the stone. He placed the letters down gently, wrapped in cloth. Tali knelt too, her mittened hands resting on the top of the marker. I don't blame you, Ashki said aloud, voice low. But I wish you'd told me. I wish you hadn't tried to carry it alone. He didn't cry. He thought he might. But all he felt was a release, like something being unhooked from his back. The silence didn't belong to him anymore. He stood, took Tali's hand, and walked away. On the drive home, Tali watched the passing snowbanks, the crows perched along fence posts. Do you think she's listening? She asked. I think she always was, Ashki said. That evening they brought out every recipe card and laid them in rows across the dining table. Tali arranged them by seasons, summer meals, winter stews, harvest dishes. She read each note like a line of poetry. Some of them carried tears, others laughter. Ashki started copying them into a new book, his handwriting rough but steady. Tali drew small illustrations beside each one, mugs of tea, pots of stew, burning juniper. They titled it The House That Remembers. Later after dinner, they opened the north room again. Not for mystery now, but for belonging. They lit the fire, made tea, and sat in the chairs facing each other. Ashki pulled out the final journal he hadn't read. It was thinner than the others, leather-wrapped with a pressed feather tucked into the spine. He opened to the first page. This is not for answers. This is for what couldn't be said when we were afraid. If you've found this, you've survived what I couldn't name. Keep naming it. That's how it ends. That's how it heals. The next page was blank. Ashki looked at Tali. She handed him a pen. It's your turn now. He looked down, stared at the clean page. Then he wrote January 12th. We told the truth today. Not because it was easy, because it was time. And the wind didn't howl. The world didn't end. It just opened. A name is more than a sound. It's a story that lived long before you did. Reuben Sosi Ashki stood in front of the tribal records office with the folder tucked under his arm. The snow had turned to slush that morning, and the walk from the truck to the steps left streaks of red mud up the back of his jeans. He barely noticed. His fingers were curled tightly around the papers. They weren't just documents anymore. They were identity, evidence, history. Inside, the clerk behind the counter looked up and offered a small nod. "You're the one from Echo Ridge, that's me. You've got an appointment with Councilman Yazzie." Ashkey nodded and took a seat. The office smelled like old carpet and fresh ink. A heater kicked on somewhere in the wall. Across the room, a framed photograph showed a line of elders standing in front of a hogan, hands linked, eyes forward. Ashkey closed his own for a moment. He thought of his mother's voice. Not the harsh one she used in anger, but the quiet one that hummed when she folded laundry, when she braided his hair as a boy. She had called him Ashkey, my boy. But that name had never appeared on any official record. The name on his birth certificate was Ashton V. Nez. The middle initial had no explanation, no context. He'd asked once when he was 14. She'd gone silent and said nothing for days. Now he knew. "Councilman Yazzie will see you now." He stood and followed the clerk into a side office, small but lined with shelves of binders and maps. Yazzie, a man in his 60s with thick silver hair and a quiet presence, gestured for Ashkey to sit. "I read the file," Yazzie said without preamble, "including the witness statements, the letters, and the marriage certificate." Ashkey nodded. "I'd like to amend the tribal roll," he said. "I want to be recognized as Ashkey Begay Nez, son of Jonas Begay and Ada Nez. I want the record to show what the truth has already told." Yazzie studied him for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. "It's not just a form," he said. "It's a line back through generations. It ties you to land, to ceremony, to burden." "You ready for that? I've carried the burden for 30 years, Ashkey said. "I just didn't know its name." Yazzie nodded once. "Then let's begin." They went through the paperwork slowly. Every name spelled carefully. Every date checked twice. Ashkey signed in thick black ink. When it was done, Yazzie placed the final form in a blue envelope and sealed it. "Give it a few weeks. The change will be entered into the National Registry too. But here, from this day forward, your father's name stands beside yours." Ashkey took the envelope in his hands. For a moment he didn't move. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Yazzie smiled softly. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to stop hiding from what they left behind. Outside, the air felt sharper, like something had shifted just enough to make room. He stopped by the trading post before heading home. Tali had asked for more paper and a set of paintbrushes. She'd been working on a mural in the back hallway of the house, red cliffs, wild horses, stars, strung above a dark mesa. She was painting their story without being told to. He grabbed a bundle of cedar while he was there, along with a bag of roasted blue cornmeal and a small wooden carving of a coyote standing howling beneath the moon. At the register, the cashier, a woman with long braids and silver earrings shaped like feathers, smiled. "You're Ada's boy." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. She used to come in here when she was little, bought hard candy with dimes her aunt gave her. She was quiet, but kind." Ashkey didn't know what to say. The simplest truths always felt the heaviest. "I'm trying to carry her story forward," he said finally. The woman nodded. "Good. That name deserves air." Back at the house, he found Tali kneeling by the wood stove, feeding it carefully. "I'm making tea," she said. "Juniper and peach leaf." He set the bundle of cedar beside her. "Got you more paint, too." She grinned. "I'm going to finish the river this week." He followed her into the kitchen where she poured 2 mugs. The air smelled like memory. He handed her the blue envelope. "What's this I name?" he said. "Officially, Ashki Begay Nez." She stared at the envelope like it was gold. "So we're part Begay, we always were. We just didn't have the paper to prove it." She nodded slowly. "I like that." They drank their tea by the window, watching a hawk glide over the snowdrifts below. After dark, Ashki returned to the north room. He placed the blue envelope in the cedar chest, alongside Honagha's journals and the recipe box. Then he lit the lamp. He took out the journal again. January 17th. The name I was born with was only half of me. Today I reclaimed the rest. Not to erase what came before, but to tell the whole truth. Jonas Begay, Ada Nez. I carry both. Tali will carry more. When he looked up, he found Tali standing in the doorway. "You wrote again, yeah." She walked over and read the last line. "Can I write next?" He handed her the pen. She added beneath his words, "Tali Nez. I carry fire food stars and everything my family forgot to say." Ashki smiled and kissed the top of her head. Outside, the wind was rising again. Not sharp like before, just a low, steady hum through the trees. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a song. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past. It just lets you walk beside it without shame. Nora Begay. The canyon road curved like a scar through the red earth, winding toward the hilltop where Margaret lived alone. Ashki hadn't made the drive in over a decade. Not since the last time Ada had brought him years before her passing, and even then they hadn't gone inside. Just dropped off a bag of groceries on the porch and left without a word. Tali sat in the passenger seat, sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't drawing, just holding it, tapping the pencil lightly against the page. "Are you nervous?" she asked without looking up. Ashki didn't answer right away. "She helped raise my mother, took care of the house after Honagha got sick, but they stopped speaking. No one ever told me why." Tali nodded slowly. "You think she has more pieces. I think she has the kind no one else was brave enough to keep." The house came into view, an adobe structure, patched with wood and rusted metal, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of time. A string of prayer flags fluttered above the porch. Smoke curled thin from the chimney. Ashki parked beneath the old piñon tree and stepped out. The air smelled like wood smoke and dry sage. A screen door creaked open before he could knock. Margaret stood in the doorway, shorter than he remembered, but still carrying herself like someone who'd never needed permission to speak her mind. Her hair was snow white, braided down her back. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. "You took your time," she said. Ashki didn't flinch. "Wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "You're Ada's boy. You're always welcome." Tali stepped forward and offered her hand. "I'm his daughter, Tali." Margaret's gaze softened. "You've got her eyes. Your great aunt's too." She opened the door wider. "Well, come on. I didn't light this fire for ghosts." Inside, the house smelled of cedar and flower. The walls were lined with photos, most in black and white, some curled at the corners. Tali moved toward them, immediately pointing out faces she recognized from the journals. Ashki stood near the fire, unsure. Margaret watched him carefully. "You've been digging." "I had to." She nodded. "Then you're ready to know the rest." She walked to a narrow shelf and pulled out a tin box. Inside were folded letters, newspaper clippings, and a photograph of Ada and Jonas different from the others. They stood near a truck, both smiling, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. This was taken 2 weeks before the fire, Margaret said. They were planning to leave, start over somewhere else. But your grandfather, he made sure that wouldn't happen. Ashki stared at the photo. You knew Margaret didn't blink. I suspected, and Honagha confirmed it years later. But by then the damage was done. Ada ran, and Honagha locked the truth behind her ribs like it could be buried. She kept so much from me, Ashki said, his voice low. She loved you, Margaret said. But love doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it hides behind protection. He took a slow breath, the weight in his chest shifting. Margaret pulled out one more letter written in Ada's hand. She sent this to me a year before she died. I never answered it. Ashki unfolded the letter carefully. Margaret, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. I was angry. At you, at the house, at myself. I blamed everyone but the one person who took everything from me. You were right to warn me. I was too in love to see the danger. And when it happened, I couldn't bear the shame. I left because I thought silence would hurt less. It didn't. If you ever speak to Ashki, tell him I'm sorry. Not just for the lies, for the silence I wrapped him in. Ada Ashki folded the letter and held it against his chest. I hated her, he said quietly, for years. And she never said any of this to me. Margaret stood beside him. She didn't know how. She came from people who swallowed everything. Hurt, pride, sorrow. It's how they thought they survived. She should have told me, he whispered. She should have, Margaret agreed. But you're telling it now, that matters. Tali approached, holding one of the old photographs. Who's this? Margaret looked at it. That's your father when he was about 16. Before the war. Before all of it. Tali smiled. He looks kind. He was. And stubborn. Just like you, I bet. They stayed for hours, drinking warm atole and listening to Margaret recount stories they'd never heard. Tales of family dinners, of music drifting through cracked windows, of Ada laughing so hard she spilled coffee down her dress. When it was time to leave, Margaret walked them to the porch. I'm glad you came, she said. This land forgets fast. But people remember when someone's brave enough to ask. Ashki nodded. I'll come again, if that's all right. Margaret smiled. Just don't wait 10 years next time. Tali hugged her arms tight. On the drive home, the sun dipped low, streaking the sky with orange and rose. The land rolled quiet around them, blanketed in fading snow. Ashki didn't speak for a long while. She wrote to Margaret, he said finally. She tried to make it right. Tali looked at him. Do you forgive her? I don't know if it's about forgiving, he said. It's about understanding. And I do. Now. They reached the house just as night fell. Ashki stepped inside and walked straight to the cedar chest. He opened it and placed the photo and Ada's letter beside the rest. Not hidden, not buried, just kept. Later, when the fire was lit and Tali had gone to bed, Ashki sat alone in the north room. He opened the journal again. January 22nd, I held her words in my hands today. The kind she never gave me in life. They didn't undo anything, but they made space. And maybe that's all forgiveness really is, space enough to keep walking. Not away, not around, but forward. He closed the journal and leaned back, listening to the house breathe. It no longer felt haunted. It felt full. Home isn't where the pain stops. It's where the healing begins. Ashki Begay. Nez. The day began with the sound of footsteps overhead. Ashki woke early, the light barely gray through the frost-laced windows. For a moment he thought it was a dream, footsteps light and quick pacing above him. But as he listened, the rhythm made sense. Tali. He pulled on his flannel and stepped into the hall, the floor cold beneath his feet. Upstairs, he found her hunched over the windowsill in her bedroom sketchbook, open eyes scanning the snow-covered ridge beyond. "What are you doing up so early?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes wide with purpose. "I saw the coyote again, the one with the scar across his eye. He was standing by the fence line, just looking at the house." Ashki moved beside her. "That's the third time this week. I think he's waiting for something," she whispered. Ashki didn't laugh. He understood what she meant. He'd started feeling it too, like something was watching, not to harm, but to witness. The land had gone quiet in that particular way, where memory settled into the soil and waited to be spoken aloud. Downstairs, the fire had gone cold. Ashki built it back up, each log placed with care, cedar crackling in thanks. He set the kettle to boil and moved through the kitchen with the steady ease of a man who finally knew how to live in a place, not just stay in it. Tali joined him with her sketchbook. "I think it's time we open the door." Ashki looked at her. "Which door?" "The old Hogan. The one behind the shed. The one Honagha never spoke of, and Ada never visited. A low-sitting circle of stone and earth half swallowed by years of brush and wind-blown dirt. No one had stepped inside it in decades." Ashki stirred the pot of mush on the stove, his hand tightening around the wooden spoon. "Why now?" "Because it's part of our story. And you promised not to leave any more of it buried." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded. After breakfast, they gathered supplies, flashlights, gloves, a pry bar in case the door stuck. Snow crunched underfoot as they crossed the field. The sky was clear, the sun low but bright. The air smelled sharp and honest. The Hogan sat squat and stubborn under a tangle of roots and stone. Its wooden door leaned inward, warped from time. Ashki brushed snow from the frame, then paused, resting his hand on the handle. "You ready?" he asked. Tali nodded, her breath clouding in front of her. The door groaned as it opened, the smell of earth and ash rushing out like a held breath. Inside, the air was thick with the past dust and wood smoke, faint traces of dried herbs. A fire pit sat in the center, blackened and cold. Along the walls were shelves with jars, cracked pottery, bundles of dried sage corn husks tied in old ribbon. It wasn't just a building. It had been someone's space. A place for stories, maybe ceremony. A place for remembering. Tali moved carefully around the edges, running her hand along the dirt-packed walls. "This wasn't abandoned," she said. "It was sealed." Ashki turned his flashlight, catching a corner where something glinted metal against stone. He stepped closer and found a lidded tin, dented but intact. Inside were photographs wrapped in muslin, letters, a small hand-woven bracelet no bigger than a wrist bone, a baby's. Ashki sat back on his heels. He knew what it was before he read a word. The first photo showed Ada seated in the field behind the house, visibly pregnant, with Honagha kneeling beside her, one arm around her shoulder. Both were smiling. The second was of a newborn, red-faced, wrapped tight in a woven blanket. Underneath, a letter in Ada's handwriting, addressed to Honagha. "I'm scared. He knows I'm carrying Jonas's child. He said it out loud yesterday. Said I was foolish to believe anyone would protect us. I saw it in his eyes, what he's capable of. I don't want this baby to grow up in fear. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll keep him safe. Promise me you won't let him believe he came from nothing." Ashki pressed his hand to the paper, fingers trembling. He read the rest in silence. Letters from Ada, some from Jonas, too. Notes passed through the cracks of a house torn by secrets. And now, finally, they'd come home. Tali was sitting near the fire pit, holding the baby bracelet. "She loved you before you even arrived," she said. "I think she spent the rest of her life trying to protect that love even when she didn't know how." Ashki closed the tin and set it gently on the floor. "We'll bring this back to the house. Make a place for it. Somewhere it can be seen." Before they left, Tali added a fresh bundle of cedar to the pit. Ashki struck a match, and the flames caught slow and steady, casting flickering shadows along the round walls. Outside, the wind had picked up. Not fierce, just present, like a breath moving across the field. They walked back in silence, the tin box clutched close, hearts heavier, but not burdened. That night, they placed the tin beside the cedar chest in the north room. Ashki added a new entry to the journal. January 26th. We opened the sealed place today. Not to find ghosts, but to welcome them back. She was never running from me. She was running for me. And somehow she never stopped trying to leave me a trail home. He looked up and found Tali standing at the door. "Do you think she knows?" she asked. "I think she's always known." Tali nodded and stepped forward, placing the baby bracelet on the mantel beside the photograph of Ada and Jonas. "Then let's not forget her again. We don't inherit peace. We build it. Stone by stone, name by name." Tali Nez. The air was warmer that morning, soft with the promise of spring. Snow still blanketed the edges of the ridge, but it was losing its grip. Thin rivulets ran through the dirt, carving quiet paths down the slope. Ashki stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the thaw begin. Behind him, the house hummed with motion. Tali was already packing boxes in the north room, humming to herself as she worked. Not to leave, just to make room. People were coming. It had started with a letter, then another, and another. Elders who hadn't stepped foot in Echo Ridge for years. Cousins and strangers who had heard the story through whispers, through Nora, through Reuben. Some wanted to see the place. Others wanted to help restore the land. One wanted to return a necklace Honagha had gifted her as a girl. Ashki hadn't expected the wave. He'd cracked open a silence, and now the wind was moving through it like breath. Tali appeared behind him, brushing lint from her sweatshirt. "Nora's bringing folding chairs. Reuben's got the pots." And Margaret, Ashki asked. "She's already out back. Brought her own stool." Ashki laughed. Of course she did. He walked around to the rear of the house where the sun hit full by mid-morning. The old picnic tables had been scrubbed and set out. Blankets layered the benches. Firewood was stacked high near the pit, and bundles of corn hung from the posts. Margaret was crouched by the stones, arranging cedar and tobacco near the fire ring. "You're not waiting for me?" Ashki asked. She didn't look up. "I've waited long enough." Ashki knelt beside her and handed her a match. She struck it clean and lit the herbs. Smoke curled upward in a steady ribbon, wrapping the circle in scent and memory. By noon, the yard was full. People arrived in trucks and on foot, some carrying pots of stew, others with baskets of bread. Laughter moved through the trees. Children ran between the juniper bushes, chasing each other with pine cones. Elders found the sunny side of the porch, swapping stories over steaming mugs. Ashki stood beside Tali as Nora stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. "We're gathered to remember what was nearly lost," she said. "Not just a house, not just names, but the truth that we were here and are still here." She gestured to Ashki. He nodded once, then stepped into the center of the circle. The fire crackled at his back. My name is Ashki Begay Nez, he said. My mother was Ada. My father was Jonas. My great-aunt was Honagha. And my daughter Tali is the future of that story. He paused, letting the wind carry his words. For too long we let silence grow roots here. But now we speak. And we listen. We remember not just the wounds, but the strength. Not just what was taken, but what remains. He turned to Tali. She stepped forward, holding the small bracelet found in the hogan. She held it up so all could see. This belonged to me before I was born, she said. It was made in love, in fear, in hope. And today I offer it back to the circle, as proof that no child grows from nothing. She placed the bracelet in the center of the altar stones. Margaret stepped beside her and added the photograph of Ada and Jonas. Nora placed a folded cloth from Honagha's kitchen. Reuben offered a single blue corn cob. One by one others came. A button, a letter, a smooth stone with a child's name etched in it. Together they built a new altar, not to worship, but to witness. That night, when the fire had dimmed and only the coals remained, Ashki stood on the porch watching the last of the taillights disappear down the road. He exhaled long and slow. Tali came up beside him wrapped in a blanket. It worked. What did letting them come home? He nodded. It's just the start. Inside the house glowed warm. The north room now held a new cabinet, glass-fronted, filled with the items from the gathering. A small sign rested inside, "These are the names we speak." Ashki opened the journal one final time. The leather had softened, the pages slightly curled. He wrote February 4th, "This house once held silence like a locked door. Today it held names, laughter, smoke, tears that didn't need hiding. I used to think I was alone in this story, but we were always a circle. I just had to step into it." He handed the journal to Tali. She added, "I'll tell this story the way Honagha told tea, warm, careful, and with room for breath between the words. And when I have a daughter, she'll know every name." They closed the book together and placed it on the shelf. Then Ashki turned off the lights one by one, moving through each room, touching the walls, not like a stranger, but like someone home. When he stepped outside one last time, the sky was clear and full of stars. The coyote was there again, near the fence line, sitting like he belonged. Ashki raised a hand. The coyote blinked once, then turned and trotted back toward the hills, disappearing into the dark. Not a ghost, not a warning. Just something wild returning to the land it had always known.